He said he loved her, but he pulled the trigger and never explained how. A single shot, no warning, no struggle, just a silent, irreversible moment in the dark. This is the case of Diane McIver, a respected businesswoman from Atlanta, Georgia, shot in the back inside her own SUV on a quiet Sunday night in September 2016. Her husband, Tex McIver, a powerful attorney with deep Southern roots and an image of success polished over decades, claimed it was an accident. But nearly a decade later, the question remains: can a gun just go off? Or did a man engineer the perfect crime while everyone was asleep? This episode of Cold Radio takes you into the shadows of the Tex McIver case, into the silences, into the contradictions, into the moments where fact and fiction blur and where truth doesn't shout, it whispers. We're diving into the top 5 most disturbing, unexplained, and contradictory elements of this case. And they are not just strange. They are the kind of details that force you to look twice and wonder what really happened when no one else was watching. We'll examine a gun wrapped in a grocery bag that somehow fired, a detour to the farthest hospital as a woman lay bleeding beside him, a grieving husband who sold her belongings within weeks and left her ashes in a box, a best friend who changed her story, and a trail of money, property, and motive that may reveal more than any witness ever did. These aren't isolated red flags, they're puzzle pieces, and when you fit them together, what emerges isn't a clean picture. It's a haunting portrait of a man who claimed to be protecting his wife, while everything he did afterward told a different story. This is a case where love, law, and loss collide, where appearances shimmer with credibility, but underneath something doesn't sit right, and where the truth, even today, feels just out of reach. Here on Cold Radio, we go beyond the headlines. We follow the inconsistencies. We examine the timeline. We question the logic behind every version of the truth. Because in this case, the evidence doesn't scream. It whispers. And sometimes, whispers are harder to ignore. So let's start where everything began. With the gun that changed everything. The one that was supposedly resting still beneath a blanket of sleep, until it didn't. Top 1. The gun that just went off. They say guns don't fire themselves, but in this case, we're asked to believe one did, through a plastic grocery bag, while the shooter was asleep. On the night of September 25, 2016, Tex McIver, once a well-connected attorney and respected figure in Georgia legal circles, was riding in the back seat of an SUV. His wife, Diane McIver, was in the front passenger seat. A close family friend, Danny Joe Carter, was driving them home to Atlanta from their weekend ranch in Putnam County. They'd shared dinner, drinks, and conversation. Laughter floated between the seats. Nothing about the evening foreshadowed what was coming. No raised voices, no signs of tension, just a couple heading home on a quiet Sunday night. But then, the car drifted off the highway, into a neighborhood Tex claimed made him uneasy. He asked Diane to hand him his revolver from the center console. She did. He then says he drifted off to sleep, and moments later, the gun went off, striking Diane in the back. But here's where the mystery deepens. The gun, a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver, wasn't holstered. It wasn't secured. It wasn't even gripped properly. It was, by Tex's own admission, wrapped inside a Publix grocery bag, a weapon shrouded in plastic, a layer between his hand and accountability. He claimed he kept it that way because of past break-ins at his law office. He said it was resting in his lap. He said he was asleep, or somewhere between asleep and awake, when the gun fired. One shot, through the bag, through the seat, through his wife. A single sound in an otherwise silent car. Forensic experts would later testify that this kind of revolver, especially in double action mode, requires about 12 pounds of trigger pressure to fire. And in single action, the hammer must be cocked manually before a light pull will release it. Either way, the trigger must be pulled. There's no scenario where this type of weapon simply goes off because someone shifts in their seat. No one saw the gun fire. No one saw Tex pull the trigger. But the physics are inescapable. A bullet was fired, through Diane's seat, at an angle that lined up perfectly with the back of her body. So now we have to ask, if Tex McIver was truly asleep, how was his finger on the trigger? If the gun was wrapped in a bag, how was it positioned to fire with such precision? And perhaps most disturbing of all, why was it pointed directly at his wife's back? This isn't just about technical ballistics. It's about intent. It's about logic unraveling beneath the weight of its own contradictions. If you fear for your safety, why point a loaded gun toward the very person you're trying to protect? And if it's an accident, how does such a tragic mistake align so perfectly with the mechanics of deliberation? Cold radio viewers have pointed out what prosecutors only hinted at in court. Even if we take Tex at his word, his explanation doesn't match reality. You don't accidentally pull a 12-pound trigger through a bag without being awake enough to understand what you're doing. You don't claim you were startled while also claiming you were asleep. And here's where the emotion of the case begins to shift. Because this wasn't just a weapon malfunction. It was a moment of truth, quiet, sudden, and devastating. Diane didn't die instantly. She turned her head. She spoke. Her words, according to Danny Joe, were simple. "I've been shot." 3 words. Software confused. Final. In that moment, everything Tex said later became shadowed by the one undeniable fact. He was holding the gun. And yet, his explanation has remained static. It was an accident. He didn't mean to. He doesn't know how it happened. But this makes us wonder, if a man is as experienced with firearms as Tex McIver reportedly was, if he owned 35 guns, if he'd taught people how to shoot, maintained collections, and even traveled with one regularly, how could he make this mistake? And why, of all directions, was the gun pointed forward, toward his wife? One cold radio viewer put it best: you don't fall asleep afraid. You don't point a gun at your wife's back, then claim to protect her. So we're left with 2 possibilities. Either Tex McIver made one of the most reckless, fatal errors imaginable, or it wasn't an error at all. The first bullet told a story, but it's the questions around that bullet that haunt this case, and the most chilling one might be this: did he fall asleep holding a loaded gun, or wake up already pulling the trigger? Top 2. The detour that changed everything. When seconds matter, why would someone choose the longest possible route? Diane McIver had just been shot. The bullet had torn through her left side, ripping into her diaphragm, her spleen, and her kidney. She was still conscious, still speaking, still alive, but her blood pressure was plummeting. And yet, in that chaotic moment, as the car sped through Atlanta's dimly lit streets, Tex McIver made a decision that would leave medical professionals and investigators alike stunned. He told Danny Joe Carter, the driver, not to go to the nearest hospital, not the closest ER, not the one where trauma surgeons were standing by. He said, "Take her to Emory." Let's be clear. There were at least 4 major hospitals within minutes of the SUV's location. Grady Memorial, a Level 1 trauma center with one of the top-rated emergency teams in the Southeast, was just 3.2 miles away. Piedmont Hospital and Atlanta Medical Center, also significantly closer than Emory, but Tex pointed them farther, to Emory University Hospital. That may not sound like much on paper, just over a mile farther. But when a woman is bleeding internally, every heartbeat counts. Every turn of the wheel becomes a gamble. So why Emory? Tex McIver was a man of status. He lived a life measured in invitations, influence, and image, and Emory, modern, private, pristine, fit that life. Grady, on the other hand, didn't. It was seen, unfairly or not, as a hospital for the desperate, for the uninsured, for the forgotten. But in this case, Grady also happened to be the hospital best equipped to save Diane's life. So why didn't they go there? Tex claimed he didn't even think of it, that Emory was just the closest hospital he knew. But here's the problem. This wasn't a tourist in Atlanta. Tex had lived in the city for decades. He'd driven past Grady's glowing red emergency sign countless times, and yet, in the one moment that called for instinct, he chose comfort over proximity. This is where the unease begins to build, because it wasn't just a detour, it was a delay. And delays in trauma are measured not in minutes, but in lives. Could it have been about control? Could he have wanted time? Time to calm down. Time for Diane to weaken. Time for his version of events to settle in before hers could be heard. It's a dark possibility, but the facts don't flinch. When they arrived at Emory, Diane was still alive. Barely. She was rushed into emergency surgery, but the damage was catastrophic. Just after midnight, she was gone, and with her, any chance to ask why, doctors later testified that had she arrived even a few minutes sooner, her odds might have changed, that faster intervention might have stemmed the bleeding in time. So we're left with a haunting possibility, that a simple turn of the wheel became a turning point in fate. And the most unsettling part? This wasn't a scream, it wasn't a gunshot. It was a quiet voice in the back seat of a speeding car saying, "No, not that way. Take her to Emory." And it begs the question, if saving her was truly the goal, why not go where she had the best chance to survive? If these two mysterious details, or anything else in this case, made you pause and think, let us know. A simple like not only supports the channel, but also helps share this story with more people. Others who are also searching for answers. Do you have a theory? Did something seem off to you? Share your thoughts, or any other detail, in the comments below. Every insight is a piece of the puzzle, and who knows, maybe you will be the one who helps bring us one step closer to the truth. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's move on to the next mystery. Top 3. The cold trail of grief, ashes, auctions, and a voicemail you were never meant to hear. Grief doesn't follow a script. But what if someone's reaction feels so out of place, it starts to look more like a strategy than sorrow? After Diane McIver was pronounced dead, the hospital room fell silent. The woman Tex had called the love of his life was gone, killed by a bullet from his own gun, under circumstances he couldn't clearly explain. And then, the clock started ticking, not toward morning, but toward movement. Quiet, calculated, cold. Within days, Tex met with his attorneys. Within weeks, he began preparing Diane's personal belongings for public auction. Jewelry, designer handbags, her fur coat collection. Not passed on to family, not preserved. Sold, through multiple estate sales, marketed explicitly as Diane's designer wardrobe. Grief is often unpredictable. But what disturbed many cold radio viewers, and prosecutors alike, was not just how fast it all happened. It was how emotionally vacant it seemed. There were no public tributes, no memorials, no eulogies, not even a visit to collect her ashes. Yes, you heard that correctly. Tex McIver left Diane's cremated remains at the funeral home for over 40 days. They sat, sealed, unclaimed, unvisited. Not on a mantle, not in a family plot, just boxed, waiting, forgotten. And while those ashes gathered dust, Tex was busy, negotiating the sale of high-value items, arranging estate listings, and quietly liquidating her life. The defense would later argue that this was simply estate management, that he was handling logistics, not avoiding grief. But even the presiding judge raised an eyebrow. Because what does it say? When a man doesn't weep, but he does itemize. And then came the voicemail, a fragment of sound that echoed louder than any cry. By this point, Tex's inner circle had begun to fracture. Danny Jo Carter, the friend who drove the SUV that night, was growing uneasy. The silence between them was stretching thin. And Tex? He was losing control. He called her husband, left a message. "Let me just be plain. Danny is about to send me to prison. Please erase this voicemail, but call me right away. Y'all have no idea the problem this is causing. It's innocent, but it's absolutely nuclear for me." That one phrase, "Please erase this voicemail," would become radioactive. Because what exactly was Tex trying to erase? What thread was he so desperate to cut? Prosecutors had their theory. This wasn't a man grieving, it was a man managing. Managing optics, managing exposure, managing people, not mourning a wife, but maintaining a narrative. This makes us wonder, if this was truly a tragic accident, why did everything afterward resemble damage control more than devastation? Why the auctions? Why the voicemail? Why treat the woman he called his world like a logistical inconvenience? To many in the cold radio community, this was the most chilling phase of the case, not because of violence, but because of vacancy. Because grief isn't clean. It's messy, loud, human. But what we saw from Tex was eerily precise. A man who didn't hold her memory, didn't cradle her absence, just sorted, sold, and moved on. No public apology, no trembling hands, just receipts and silence. And in that silence, one question still echoes. If Diane was the love of his life, why did he bury her memory before he even collected her ashes? Top 4. When loyalty cracks, Danny Joe's story changes, and the lie no one expected. In every story like this, there's someone caught in the middle, not the victim, not the accused, but the person who was just close enough to see the truth, and just far enough to be silenced by it. In the Tex McIver case, that person was Danny Joe Carter, a longtime friend of Diane's and the driver of the SUV the night she was shot. At first, she was Tex's greatest ally. She told police it was an accident. She told the media the same. She said she believed Tex McIver loved Diane deeply and that the shooting was nothing more than a tragic, unintentional mistake. But then, 4 months after the incident, something changed. Danny Joe came forward again, this time not with comfort, but with accusation. She sat down with detectives, inside the very SUV where Diane was shot, and dropped a bombshell that fractured the entire foundation of Tex's defense. She said Tex asked her to lie. The night of the shooting, in the immediate chaos and confusion, Danny Joe says Tex approached her with a request that has haunted this case ever since. "Why don't you just tell them you weren't in the car?" That sentence, if true, isn't just odd. It's revealing. Because why would a man whose wife had just been shot be thinking about who was in the car? Why would covering up her presence even cross his mind? Unless it served some other purpose. Tex's lawyers tried to explain it away. They said he was trying to protect Danny Joe from media pressure, that she was overwhelmed, that he was helping. But here's the problem. At the time that conversation allegedly happened, there was no media attention yet. There was no crowd of cameras, no headline, no public firestorm, just Tex. And a story that hadn't quite settled yet. That makes us ask, what did he think she might say? What did she know? Later, Tex arranged for Danny Joe to appear before reporters to deliver a carefully worded statement that the shooting had been entirely accidental. She never showed up. She stopped returning his calls, and then came the voicemail. You've heard it before. His pleading, urgent voice. "Danny is about to send me to prison. Please erase this voicemail." For many cold radio listeners, that was the moment the scales tipped. Because this wasn't just a man reacting emotionally. It was a man orchestrating the reaction of others. And Danny Joe? She broke the pattern. She started as a loyal friend. She ended up as a critical witness, not just to the shooting itself, but to the behavior that followed it. This makes us wonder, what else was said in that car during those 15 minutes between the gun going off and arriving at the hospital? What tone did Tex use? What looks passed between them? What was implied, but never said out loud? There's something uniquely disturbing about this point, not because it's violent, but because it's covert. Not a scream, not a shot, just a sentence whispered in the fog of panic, designed to bend the truth before it even had time to form. It's not about the gun, it's about power, and how it's used, in subtle, surgical ways, to shift stories before they can settle. Audience reactions to this detail have been some of the most visceral. If you're innocent, you don't ask people to lie. That voicemail sealed it. He wasn't grieving, he was panicking. The courtroom saw it. The jury heard it. But the most haunting part isn't what Tex asked, it's why he thought Danny Joe might say yes. Because if she had, we might never have heard the real story at all. Top 5. The Money Trail. What Tex stood to lose, and what he regained the night Diane died. Follow the money. It's a phrase every seasoned investigator learns early on, and in this case, the trail leads to a motive that might explain everything. On paper, Tex McIver didn't need Diane's money. He was a well-established attorney, connected, financially comfortable. But beneath the surface, his financial reality was unraveling. Court documents reveal that Diane had loaned Tex $350,000 to build a lavish guest house, the saloon, on his rural ranch. It wasn't a gift. It was documented with a promissory note and included language that allowed Diane to foreclose on the property if Tex failed to repay the loan. And that wasn't the only debt. Before their marriage, Diane had also loaned Tex $750,000, and in return, he deeded her half ownership of the ranch, his prized asset. At the time of her death, those debts were unpaid. Privately, Tex had told friends he was struggling to maintain his lifestyle. His law firm income had been slashed, and the ranch, with its $20,000 to $25,000 monthly expenses, was becoming a noose. Emails read in court revealed that Tex had joked about becoming a gigolo or hitting the lottery just to cover bills. Jokes, but laced with panic. So now we ask, what happens if Diane, the creditor and co-owner, suddenly dies? The answer is simple and chilling. Tex regains control. With Diane gone, her ownership stake in the ranch dissolved into probate. Her threat of foreclosure disappeared, and those debts, no longer legally enforceable in the way they once were. Financially speaking, Diane's death didn't just remove a liability, it erased the only person standing between Tex and financial collapse. And here's where the facts get uncomfortable. Because within weeks of Diane's death, Tex began selling her luxury items, claiming he needed the cash to pay estate obligations. But prosecutors argued this wasn't about obligation. It was about liquidation, converting her wealth into his safety net. And it wasn't just what he gained, it's what he avoided. Diane, by multiple accounts, had begun to draw lines. She'd stopped paying for ranch expenses. She'd reportedly grown tired of Tex's spending. And some witnesses believed she was preparing to assert more control over their financial arrangement. Was she about to act on that foreclosure clause? Was the marriage entering a turning point where financial entanglement became personal tension? We can't know for sure. But in Cold Radio's analysis, we always return to patterns. And the pattern here is stark. A man drowning in financial pressure. A wife who held the deed, the loans, and the leverage. And then, one fatal night, all of it disappears. This makes us wonder. Was Diane's death just a tragic accident? Or was it the most convenient outcome Tex could have imagined? Even if we accept that he didn't intend to kill her, the gain is undeniable. And that's what makes this detail, the money trail, so disturbing. Because it's not just about cash, it's about freedom, and what someone might do when backed into a corner, watching everything they've built begin to slip away. Cold Radio viewers expressed it best. His net worth was $1.7 million, the same as what he owed her. That's not coincidence. She was going to foreclose. He couldn't let that happen. Love doesn't look like liquidation. And here's the part that stings the most. If Tex had come clean, if he had admitted panic, desperation, even guilt, we might see a man unraveling. But instead, what we got was strategy. A man who stayed composed, calculated, and quietly removed every obstacle between him and solvency. So we're left with this. The night Diane died, Tex's biggest problem vanished. And the question that lingers louder than ever is this. Did financial desperation pull the trigger before the gun ever did? What do you think about these 5 mysterious elements? Which one lingers in your mind the most? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below before we dive into the collective analysis and explore the major theories behind these mysteries. And if you believe this video deserves to be seen, leave a like and hit subscribe to Cold Radio. That's how you help bring these cold cases one step closer to the light of truth. We've now walked through 5 of the most unsettling, inexplicable, and quietly haunting elements in the Tex McIver case. But standing alone, each one is a puzzle piece. The real question is, what picture do they form when we lay them side by side? Let's take a step back. Let the silence settle in, and look at what emerges from the fog of conflicting facts and forensic fragments. A man says he feared for his safety, yet fell asleep with a loaded gun in his lap. He chose the farthest hospital, not the closest trauma center, as his wife bled beside him. After her death, he moved quickly, too quickly, auctioning her belongings, leaving her ashes in a box, leaving emotion behind. He asked her best friend to lie, left a voicemail begging for silence, and beneath it all, a money trail, a debt, a deed, a motive that evaporated the moment Diane did. These aren't just eerie details, they're threads, and when you pull them together, a pattern begins to emerge, a shape both familiar and disturbing. From the perspective of an investigator, one fact stands out like a spotlight in a dark room. Every one of these mysteries benefits Tex McIver. Every inconsistency, every convenient silence, every choice that doesn't quite make sense, all of it narrows the path between tragedy and opportunity. Let's talk about contradictions. If Tex truly feared for their safety in that moment, why relax enough to fall asleep in a dangerous neighborhood with a cocked revolver in his lap? If he was concerned with preserving Diane's legacy, why sell her personal effects before even collecting her remains? If he wanted the truth out, why tell Danny Jo to pretend she wasn't there? And if he wanted to save Diane's life, why not take her to the trauma center minutes away? Each action taken on its own might have a rational explanation, but taken together, they begin to erode the foundation of coincidence. They paint a picture of someone who wasn't confused, but calculating, and that calculation carries a chill of its own. Let's now examine the most common theories. Theory 1. The accident theory. Tex McIver's original claim: he was startled awake, handling the gun half asleep, and it discharged without intent. This theory hinges on sleep disorder evidence and the chaos of the moment, but it fails to explain his behavior afterward. Why not simply tell the truth? Why the auctions, the voicemail, the inconsistencies? What kind of accident needs that much cleanup? Theory 2. The financial motive theory. Tex was deeply indebted to Diane. If she foreclosed on the ranch, his entire identity, his legacy, would crumble. Her death, by tragic coincidence or otherwise, solved that problem. This theory fits the timeline. The debt, the estate moves, the pressure. But it also forces us to confront a darker question. Would he really kill for money? For image? For control? Theory 3. The control spiral theory. Some believe this wasn't premeditated murder or pure accident, but something in between. A moment of impulse from a man desperate to preserve his life as he knew it. Not cold-blooded, but coldly logical. This theory suggests Tex pulled the trigger, intentionally or not, and then spent the next 24 hours building a story to fit the shot, curating his image, managing the narrative, like someone scrubbing a whiteboard before the ink even dries. Each theory explains some things, but none explains everything, because at the heart of this case, there is no confession, no eyewitness, no surveillance footage, just silence, strategy, and shadows. There's only a set of strange choices: a dead woman, and a man whose every move after that night feels like something between damage control and erasure. And so we ask, was it really just a tragic slip of the finger, or the final move in a slow-motion unraveling? That's where we turn to you, our Cold Radio community. What do you think happened that night in the SUV? Was it fear, or was it planning? What theory best fits the facts, and which detail still keeps you up at night? Do you believe the auction was just a legal formality? Do you buy that someone truly afraid of the neighborhood would fall asleep with a gun drawn? Or do you believe, like many viewers have commented, that this was a man who wanted to look innocent but acted guilty? Your theories, your perspectives, and your logic are part of this story now, because in a case like this, the more eyes we have on the puzzle, the closer we come to seeing the truth behind it. Some cases end in a courtroom, others never do, and some, like this one, leave behind something that never quite settles, like dust, caught in the air after a storm. The shooting of Diane McIver was ruled not an accident, but felony murder. Tex McIver was found guilty, not of premeditated intent, but of causing harm that led to death. The courtroom reached its conclusion, but the story never truly closed, because the ripples of that night reached far beyond the walls of a hospital. They echoed through Atlanta's upper echelons. They broke bonds that once seemed unshakable. They stirred a quiet unease around how power operates when grief, money, and murder intersect, but removed the headlines, the wealth, the optics. At the center of it all was Diane. By every account, she was luminous, a self-made executive, a mentor, a woman who rose from hardship to helm a real estate empire. She celebrated birthdays with flair, wore wide-brimmed hats with pride, and poured love into a godson like he was her own. She had strength, she had presence, she had grace. She wasn't just a statistic or a legal case. She was the person people called when things fell apart. She was the one others leaned on. And then, in one moment of violence, she was gone. The first thing she said after the gun went off? "Tex didn't mean to shoot me," a sentence that has haunted this case from the start. Was it spoken from love or confusion, from clarity or denial? Was it her truth or the beginning of his? 2 hours later, she was dead, and the space left in her absence began to fill with theories, transcripts, contradictions, everything except peace. And what did Tex walk away with? Not the ranch, not the fortune, not the reputation he spent decades cultivating. Just 7 years of probation, and a silence that grew louder with every unanswered question. What do we do with that? What do we do with justice that feels quiet, when the loss it follows was deafening? When a woman dies under such chilling, contradictory circumstances, what, exactly, do we owe her? We owe her more than headlines. We owe her more than speculation. We owe her, at the very least, the refusal to let her death be reduced to a courtroom footnote. Because justice isn't always a sentence. Sometimes it's persistence. Sometimes it's remembrance. And sometimes it's asking the hard questions when no one else will. Why did the gun point at her back? Why the detour? Why the auction before the ashes? Why the voicemail? These are not just loose ends. They're echoes. And if we stop listening, they fade. But Diane's story doesn't deserve to fade. It deserves to be told. Again and again. By people who care more about truth than appearances. Because in the end, justice isn't always found in a verdict. Sometimes it's found in the voices that refuse to let a story be buried. Diane McIver lived a full life. She deserved a full explanation. And if that explanation never comes, let this be the vow. We will keep asking. We will keep questioning. We will keep remembering. Because justice starts with not forgetting. This was the Tex McIver case. If this video offered you a new perspective or made you pause and reflect, please hit like to help Cold Radio share this story with more people. What are your thoughts on this case? What part left you questioning the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because every perspective, every theory, could be a vital piece of the truth we're all trying to uncover. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss any of the cases we'll be opening next. Thank you for joining us, listening, and lending your voice to Cold Radio's pursuit of the truth.